Ready, set, go. Back in the can for another edition of the Lunatic Fringe podcast and a special guest on the other side. Please, straight to it. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, my name is Kim Emmons Knor. Emmons being my maiden name, and I'll tell you about that later.
Please.
And what I've been doing is I've been skydiving since 1959. And so I've had, I had a 37-year hiatus, you might call it. And then I got back into it again and so forth. And now the children are all raised, the grandchildren are raised into their 20s now. So it's time for me to have my fun and do all the things that I put on the back burner. And
Nice.
I'm trying to finish. I need about 414 jumps to get my 1,000 for my gold wings. That's my goal now.
That's spectacular. Now, you say you started jumping in 1959. Wow. You've been at this a while.
Yeah, I was 20 years old and I got the opportunity listening to, that was just the beginning when they were starting little clubs,
Sure.
Here and there. And and I overheard some special forces guys that were in reserves. They'd just gone into reserves and they said, wow, we got to find a pilot to fly us. There are 2 or 3 of them wanted to get together. This is in Chicago in a drugstore.
Okay.
And so I said, is this just for military guys or can I jump too? Is this for civilians? And they said, well, yeah, why don't you come out and see what it's all about? So
wow. Now, I mean, this is back when skydiving was still very military in most of the stuff, right? I mean, the clubs were, as you said, just getting started. So were you intimidated to get started back then as a woman and 20 years old? I mean, at a whole different time in the world, jumping out of airplanes was not what was expected of a 20-year-old girl.
Well, no, sometimes society expects things that aren't necessarily a part of my life,
Absolutely.
But I had been wanting to jump since I was 6 years old. So,
really, what sparked the
here's
interest?
the opportunity. My uncle came back from flight school, and he got finished with his flight school at the end of the war, so he never got sent anywhere. So he came home and said, "Now what do I do?" And he was a strapping young guy that, oh my gosh, I just drooled over him. 6 years old, and said, "Would you marry me when I grow up?" Yeah. So anyway, he brought home a canopy because he had to jump. I'm sure you probably know about, when you have to jump to save your life.
Sure, bailing out, you bet.
Caterpillar, well, the Caterpillar Jump Club,
Oh, yeah.
So he did that twice, but the second time his canopy caught on the tail of the plane and it ripped it. So they let him take it home for a souvenir.
Nice. And he brought this back to a 6-year-old that decided that a torn
Cadillac,
parachute.
Michigan. Yep, right in Cadillac, Michigan. We had a house full because there were 6 in our family already. And so I said, he can use my bedroom. And so I had a little tiny walk-in closet. And so he used my bedroom and I slept wrapped up in his parachute.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
thinking about my day.
I mean, the daydream starts at 6 years old, but was this something that was actively on your mind all the way up until you were 20, or did it just all come flooding back when you overheard them?
No, it was on my mind all along because then he talked my dad into buying an airplane. And so he had an airplane and then he got a pontoon airplane so he could go in when we went camping. He'd fly in to see us and land on lakes and stuff like that. We used to go up in Canada, way out in the woods. The Indians had to take us out there.
Wow.
But my dad was very adventurous. And so anyway, every time I go up flying with my dad, this is going into 10, 11, 12 years old, we had to wear seat packs. And so I was trying to figure out a way that I could accidentally fall out the door. And so, I'd sort of leave it unlatched when we were leaving the runway. And it never worked, unfortunately. I didn't know I had to push that much harder.
Sure.
But I always knew I had to have enough altitude to get that thing open. But anyway, that was my.
Your father must have been a basket case every time he got in the plane with you.
Well, yeah, I don't think he knew what I was trying to do. He said, "Oh, you didn't latch that door again." So finally, he came around and made sure it was closed before we left.
So you grow up with aviation and some pretty exciting stuff that certainly for the time would have been considered extreme by most standards. And then 20 years old rolls around. Did you go to your family and say, "Hey, I'm going to go jump out of this airplane," or did you surprise them after the fact?
No, I surprised him after the fact. Actually, I went and when I graduated high school, I went to Michigan State and changed my major four times in 1 year as a freshman. But I had a lot of fun too
I
on
bet.
the side since I didn't know why I was there other than I have to go to classes and do things. So I got to the point by the end of the year, I was leaving with my boyfriend who's from New York.
Mm.
And so we'd take a long weekend. We'd leave on Wednesday night and go to New York for the weekend. And Dad says, you're not going to do this anymore. He said, you're on probation right now at Michigan State. He said, we're going to move you closer to home at Central Michigan. So I went there, got my grades back up and did the do. And
Right.
then I said, I don't have a major still. I don't know. I've changed it so many times. I really don't know what I'm going to do. And so I'm going to go to Chicago because I had some friends from high school that were living in Chicago working for United Airlines. So I said, I'm going to do that. He said, no, you're not. He said, you're not working for the airlines. And I said, well, I'm going to Chicago one way or another. And so, by that time I was 20 years old.
Mm.
You can't tell me what to do. So anyway, he talked to his friend in Chicago and got me a job at Sears and the Sears catalog department out in the western part of Chicago.
Sears catalog. I'm old enough to remember Sears catalog, but I
Yeah.
guarantee there's a lot of people listening that have no idea what we're talking about.
I'm sure. So I worked there, for a while, then I was living on the north side of Chicago, and that's where I met these guys in the drugstore. I was just go hanging out because the guy that worked he was on reserves. He'd just gotten home, and his family owned the drugstore, and about six kids all worked in the drugstore, and he was really cute. So I'd hang out, flirt with him, and here comes his buddies. So that's how it all got started.
It's funny that so many of the guests that I've had on their start in skydiving had some desire that was younger in their life, but it was some random events that brought them back to it. And this seems to be no exception. Very random, and of course, bumping into guys in the drugstore to go out and make a jump in 1959.
Right, right. When it was just really starting. I mean, you got to remember the the American skydivers or people that were in parachuting at all didn't even have people to send to world championships or anything until I think it was 56 was the first time, and then 58 and 60. And but there weren't many females. There were females in the foreign countries, but not here.
Sure.
So I jumped for 2 years before I jumped to the first time I jumped with another girl.
I mean, you're kind of one of the pioneers of it, really. I mean, this is the original stuff. How was that
Yeah.
first jump? What was it like?
Oh, it was wonderful. I got out of the plane and got out on the strut and the wheel and the 172, and we didn't have a static line, unfortunately. My logbooks say I did static line jumps, but we didn't have one. So he said, "Well, you're not going to get licensed if we don't put that in there." So I said, "Okay, whatever. Do what you have to do." And so uh, he reached over and pulled the ripcord for me, so it was sort of like a hop and pop or a
Okay.
pop,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
at once.
yeah.
And so he did one or two of those, and then I said, "Well, I can do that. You don't have to do that." So I did from then on. But that first one, it wasn't me. It was the canopy that took the power lines down. I cleared the power lines, but the canopy pulled down a lot of power lines.
So your very first jump,
First
you
jump.
you end up taking power lines out.
Yeah, and I said, let's hurry up and pack fast and do another jump and get out of here before they know who did that?
So when you're going out to make this first jump, obviously you've been waiting a long time, but I remember waiting quite some time before I got to make my first jump after I had decided I wanted to, and I still had to deal with a pretty healthy dose of fear. Was there any fear for you, or was it just raw excitement?
No, it was just, yeah, just to finally get to do it. Oh boy, this is it. And well, when I went out to the drop zone, where they wasn't even called a drop zone, when I went to the airport where we had a pilot that would fly, there were three guys in the club by that time, and then the fourth one came along, and only me and the original guy, Jimmy Stoyos, was the guy that at the drugstore that he showed me how to pack. So for the next 2 or 3 months, all I was doing was packing chutes for them.
Sure,
And finally I said, that's it. Oh, and we were modifying chutes because we were going down to Fort Bragg and getting Army surplus from World War II
sure,
and bring those canopies back to Chicago and find out what at that time they were the Strack team, at Fort Bragg.
sure,
And then they became the General Stilwell actually got the financing and everything to get a United States Army demonstration team. And he signed my logbook then too. He has a B license. He did.
it's
Anyway,
spectacular.
it's really cool. But anyway, I went through that thing of learning how to pack and everything, and then we'd drive down there and see what they're doing for modifications. And since I already knew how to sew, I was sewing my own clothes anyway. So I started sewing. We'd cut panels out and sew them and put some hem tape on there, and then we were using the modifications every few months that the guys in Fort Bragg were, experimenting and doing and developing that at that time
Sure.
7TU is what we ended up with in 62.
So, I mean, you basically start out, you do two jumps in your first day because you want to get another one done so nobody catches you taking the power lines
Yeah, get
out,
out of there quickly.
which is just kind of badass. And then you end up straight into packing and what would now be called rigging.
Yeah. Well, I did everything that I needed to do. Actually, in 1962, there was a guy that was the master rigger for Jacques Castell in Orange, Massachusetts. That's where the world championships were that I jumped in. And anyway, I spent a lot of time with the master rigger there, is Bill Jolly. And he said, all you have to do at this point is just take the written exam. And I said, well, I don't know if I want to be the master rigger because people have told me that everybody comes to you with their shoots and their problems and everything. And I said, I'm only interested in competing.
Right.
I'm a competitor. On my 30th jump, I started competing. So why would I want to get into rigging? So I said, at least I know what to do with my own equipment.
Sure. So now by this time you say you're starting to compete at 30 jumps, you've been packing parachutes and you're rigging. I'm assuming the family now knows that you're jumping out of airplanes, or do they not?
Yeah, that's really weird. My mom has this I don't know what it is. It's some kind of a communication that she knows whenever I needed anything or whenever I was, you know, contemplating or hurt or something, I would get a telephone call from her. And I said, I don't know how she does this. It's mental telepathy, I guess, or something.
Sure.
But she called one day and, I was living in Chicago. This is before cell phones, and she called the apartment in the middle of the day on a Wednesday. And I said, oh my gosh. And she said, well, I figured you would answer the phone. I said, how did you know that? And she said, well, you're home from work. Something happened. And I said, how do you know that? No, nothing happened. Everything's fine. And anyway, it turned out I had a bad landing on Sunday and I went to work Monday and Tuesday. And by Wednesday, I said, I really, really have to recover, and go home.
Sure. I
So,
mean, this is again, it was a really different time. So, were you nervous that your family would find out? Were you nervous to tell your mom that you were jumping out of airplanes? I mean, that's a big
well,
deal.
no, that day when she called, I was actually very happy to hear from her because I had opened my reserve, and those are called belly warts, the
Yeah,
reserves and so forth. And nobody told me to put my arms through the lines so that you're more vertical when you're landing. And it was a very, very icy, cold day in January.
Oh,
And I landed it sort of the end of January. So the sun had come out and there was ice anyway on the ground. And I landed on my pelvis, because you're coming down, laying down actually. And I
sure.
landed there. We're supposed to go night skiing that night. So I said, oh man, that hurt. And they said, let me help you up, let me help you up. So they ran over and you know how that is. And I got up and everything was fine. I said, man, that really, really hurt. And they said, well, you're not going to go skiing too. I said, well, we're all going skiing. I don't have a ride back to Chicago if I don't go skiing. I've got my equipment with me. So I said, you guys go do your skiing, do all the blacks and blues or whatever you want to do. I'm just going to stay on the little beginner's hill and be very careful not to fall. And so that was it. Well, that Wednesday that I was home, I had gone in for an x-ray to find out how bad the damage was because it really hurt to walk or to get dressed or to run to catch the bus. I fell down, try to go to work.
Oof.
And it turned out I shattered my pelvis on
Oh
that
my
jump.
Lord.
And so he said, your pelvis looks like a map of the United States with all the country roads on it. But he said, it's all intact. So you just can't jump. Don't walk fast. Don't run. Don't do anything. Just very slowly make your way wherever you have to go and try to stay off stairs as much as you can. Use elevators. So he said in about 6 weeks he'll feel a lot better. And he said 6 to 8 weeks. And he said, wait a little while. I looked at my logbooks the other day and it was 6 weeks and one day when I made my next jump.
You break your pelvis on a jump. You, in true skydiver fashion, go skiing that day and then work for a couple of days before you get it checked out, of course, as skydivers do.
I just
And
think
then
it'll be better.
and then 6 weeks later, you're jumping back out of an airplane.
Yeah,
I'd like to say that the skydiving throughout all the generations that we've learned something, but none of us have because I've done the same thing, and most of the jumpers I know have.
I know. And they know this is what happened to me, but it doesn't matter. It is what it is.
So you're sitting there having a conversation with your mom who's used telepathy to figure out she needs to call you because she knows somehow that you're hurt. And now you're not only explaining to her that you're a skydiver, but that you're injured. And she took it
Yeah.
well?
Well, she said, oh my goodness, I figured you were doing something like that. I mean, she knew me very well
Sure.
because the whole growing up, I always would go do my own thing or push to get this done. There weren't any skiers in the family, so I wanted to be a downhill skier. And I did. And I had to join the club and everything. So that was like my Christmas presents and stuff like that.
Sure.
But she knew something. And I think she suspected something was going on because otherwise she would have heard from me more frequently.
She figured you were into something.
But I had only been jumping. Well, I started jumping in December. That was when we knocked the power line. I knocked the power lines out of my canopy. Uh, anyway, that was the 13th of December. So in Chicago. And so when the power went out, a lot of people were very cold, I think, that day.
That's spectacular. That's,
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
this was in January, probably the end of January. I can't remember what the date was, but anyway, so I had only been jumping about 6 weeks.
mm.
She didn't
And
know about.
so you heal, you start jumping again, you're packing parachutes, doing all this kind of stuff, and then you start to compete. So tell me how that came about.
Yeah, well, in those days we had to throw a wind streamer to find
Yep.
out, because of the parachutes we're using, you have to go where the wind takes you. You didn't have much steerability, a little bit, but not much. And so anyway, I was good at getting right directly over the airport or the whatever we had down there, and dropping the wind streamer and projecting where we're going to exit. And so he said, we don't have any women's team. We barely have a men's team now for world championships. But he said, there were two individual women that went in the past, but there was never a team put together. So he
Mm.
said, you got to start competing. We need more females and we need competition females. And so I said, oh, okay. And we were in Chicago, and that was the only operation that was in Chicago. I was the number 5 in the club. So they let me join the club as number 5. And so anyway, they did have competition in Iowa, and Jim Garrison was out in Oklahoma or Kansas City is where he was, and he was starting to do competitions, everything. And in fact, some friend a couple of years ago was out there. They were auctioning off, I think, all of his stuff after he died and so forth. So he was out there, and he got one of the catalogs. No, that wasn't a catalog; it was a program
Mm.
from the second national, no, the second annual competition of skydiving, whatever the name of it was. And so he said, oh my gosh, he said, I was looking at the competitors, who they were, and it said your name, Kim Emmons, and it said behind in parentheses, only female. So that's where we had to go. We had to go from Chicago to Kansas City or to Des Moines, Iowa, or to no, see where else was another place in Iowa we went frequently, and for competition. But there's nothing near.
Sure.
So
So, I mean, while all this is going on, I mean, you've seen all these changes throughout the years with skydiving. What was it like with the clubs and stuff? Because now obviously there's been the bonfires have grown and the parties have grown and the culture has grown, but you were there for the beginning of it. So I mean, was it a whole lifestyle as well when you left the drop zone? Did you stay with the jumpers, or was it a day of jumping and then you'd head on home?
well, no, like I said, we went skiing in the wintertime after we're done jumping. And then we'd usually have dinner together, and then everybody go home. And the people that were in that little group that I was with in Chicago, um, they were all from Chicago. So we ate somewhere out before. We didn't go into Chicago and have dinner and,
Mm,
and everything there. We usually eat out in the little towns where we were. And we were in charge or in communication with each other um, a lot during the week,
nice.
talking about the weather and who's going to be any more friends, anybody going to bring friends out to the airport. We'd sort of plan out what's going to happen on the weekend.
Sure.
And so it was a very tight little group, just like, some of the drop zones are that way. I was just in the Midwest this past summer and visiting a lot of 2 large drop zones and a lot of small drop zones. And there's that same club feeling.
Sure.
I even went to Lincoln, which is still a skydiving club, and they're still very, very close together, and they're the regulars that show up every weekend and everything. And like now in their Facebook, they communicate about the weather, and
Sure.
maybe it'll clear up by 1 o'clock, we'll go out there and so forth. So, and that's the way it always was then. Now we have these, like you say, big centers, like what happened in Dubai,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
and
becoming a huge drop zone and extremely busy with tandems and stuff. It's funny that you
mm,
say, I mean, I don't think a lot has changed in that tight-knit feel. I think the club just got a hell of a lot bigger.
bigger, yeah.
Because
And
here
there's
you
more of them.
Yeah, I mean, here you and I sit talking, and you're in the States and I'm in Finland. We've never met before, but we were
No,
introduced by a fellow skydiver. It's just part of that big club, right?
that's exactly right. And everybody knows, like, this is just a little sidebar, maybe. Um, when I re-met my husband
Oh, I got to
and
hear
we
this
got
story,
married.
please.
Yeah. Okay. Um, anyway, just to tell you about this was in 1962.
Hmm.
And at that time when I re-met, he was the guy that defected during the 1962 World Championships.
Okay.
And he was from Yugoslavia. And at the end of the ceremony at the end of the ceremony, when they passed out all the awards and the trophies and all that kind of stuff, we were marching out of the the bowl that they had built for this event. And United States and USSR and Yugoslavia are all at the end of the alphabet. So they're coming out of it. And it was in August. It was really hot and everything. But at the end of that meet is when he defected. And the last thing in my mind is who's going to defect, or we knew there was a guy from Russia, but he got caught in Boston, you know. And so, and I didn't know anything about my husband Milan, that he was even doing that. And so it's a long story how it all occurred and why he decided to do that. But anyway, I was just interested. I had a $5 bill in my pocket, and
Right.
I had to get home back to Michigan. I had no way to get home. And my parents had been out there to see the championships, but they were weathered out so much it was delayed. And so they went home and they took a lot of my equipment home with them, but I still had my parachute stuff, my kit bag, and a backpack of clothes, and that was it. And so I was so concerned about not having to go on the highway and hitchhike. You know, I'm trying to find somebody out of this whole group that could get me to Michigan.
Sure.
And so I did find that, and I did get back. That's another whole story. It's funny. Anyway, so after that time, for 4 years, we didn't see each other at all. And I didn't really know exactly where he was, and he didn't know because I was here and there in California and then back in Michigan. I opened a contact lens company and did a bunch of stuff. And then he said later, he said, yeah, at one point I thought you were killed. Everybody said, no, nobody knew where I was or anything. I had sold everything and gone to Europe as a parachute bum for a year.
Wow.
So nobody, I wasn't communicating with anybody. You know?
Yeah, this is pre-Facebook, so you're not posting that you're in Europe jumping.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So anyway, bottom line is, yeah, one of our friends that was working for, he was one of the old Army skydivers, you know, that I knew from the Army team, and which became the Golden Knights and everything. And I was working in Washington, D.C., and I went out to jump, and there he was at the airport. And I said, what are you doing here? I thought you were in Vietnam. And he said, I did 2 tours over there, and now I'm out. And I said, well, what are you doing here? What are you know, he said, well, I'm working. And I said, working at what? And he said, well, the company. And I said, oh, the company. Oh, okay. And never asked him anything more about it. It just, you know, the
The
company.
the
Well,
company?
as I stayed around, Langley's the home office of the company. So
Oh my God. So,
anyway,
all right, so for maybe some of the younger kids that are listening that either haven't watched enough movies like I have, the company, I know exactly what you mean by the company, but so your husband defected from Yugoslavia. You
yeah.
knew him, lost touch with him. He obviously became a citizen, went and fought in Vietnam for the United States and ended up working
No,
for,
no, no, no.
no?
That was my husband. No, that was the guy I met out when I started jumping. And
Oh, okay, okay.
sorry, I got ahead of myself.
No, no, no. Okay, okay.
Yeah, no, the drop zone where I found the closest one into Washington, where I was working, doing contact lenses again.
Right.
Um, yeah, the closest drop zone was where they had and I didn't know it. I just went out there and started jumping, and I kept seeing these guys from the Army team and so forth that were showing up, and they're all working for the company. And I said, oh my gosh, that's really weird. Many years later, actually, just about 8 years ago, with the DNA thing and all that kind of thing, I
Sure.
found a cousin that I signed her logbook, and we were both jumping on the same load, and she was working for the company too. I
Oh,
didn't even know. Nobody knew anything then, you know. We just want to jump. Who cares, you know? So
how funny
anyway,
is that? Oh,
yeah,
it's kind of funny because I suppose that's the same as it's been now. The skydiving has always been such a blending of cultures from
exactly.
from cops to criminals, and I love that you keep saying the company. So the CIA in the 60s, and you're out there skydiving with a bunch of CIA people.
Exactly. That's what it was. And so it turned out that this guy that I knew really well, and we started going to concerts together and stuff like that. And he said, he called me up one day and he said, oh gosh, he said, you've got to go down. And he said, what are you doing tonight? And I said, nothing, of course. And he said, well, I have to go out to Langley. And he said, I just picked up some people from Pioneer Parachute Company. They were doing some testing and stuff up in Baltimore. They got fogged in. And so I drove them down to Washington because you can always get out of Washington. Put them in a hotel right there by the, actually my apartment was right at the same area.
Oh,
And it
wow.
was, I could see the airport, which is, what do they call the Washington airport now?
Dulles?
No, no, no. Um, that's up in Baltimore, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, to be
Oh,
honest.
oh, oh, let me turn this. Sorry,
Sure,
I
no,
thought
no,
it.
that's okay.
Anyway, yeah. Anyway, the Washington airport right there. I think they call it. Is it Reagan Airport now, or I don't know what it is. So,
Hmm.
but anyway, they wanted me to go down to Mr. Smith's, which is a restaurant where they all hang out. I've been there with all that group that I jumped with.
Sure.
And so they took him down to Mr. Smith's, and he said, they're down there, and I want you to go down and keep them company. And if I don't show up by 10 o'clock, it means I went to Langley, I'm gone. But you have to get them back to the hotel and on the plane in the morning back to Connecticut. And I said, oh, okay. I said, who am I looking for? What's the names? And he said, never mind. He said, they know who you are. There's not that many females jumping. Just go down there and they know who you are. And I've got to go. Click. And he hung up. And when I got down there, Milan, the guy that defected way back 4 years ago, was there. And within 3 months, we were married.
That's so much better than I thought it was going to be. Well,
And the reason that he knew about us was because the guy that I'm talking about that was the jumper was Squeak Surratt. He's one of the original guys for the Army team and stuff. So anyway, he knew that we knew each other. He knew the whole thing.
oh, wow.
And he knew that we'd been looking for each other because that's what his job is, to know
Sure.
everything. Every
Well,
time
so
he would show up at a drop zone with his suitcase and so forth, Milan would say, oh, Squeak, you're here again. It wasn't like
so
very informal.
you're jumping in the 60s. You've just re-met up with your Yugoslavian defector who becomes your husband. You're jumping with the CIA, and it's the 60s. There's a lot
Yeah.
going on.
I know. It was really weird, because during the 60s also was Cold War.
Yeah,
So I had just come back from Europe. I mean, the reason I had the job in Washington is I was in Europe having a wonderful time, jumping all over the place. I went to like 30 different countries and everything. And I came back because my mom called and said, I've got carpal tunnel surgery in both my wrists. It's Christmas. You got to come back. You got
mm,
to come help me. No, 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 no. I say, I've got two sisters. No, no. She said, you have to come back. You're the only one that can do this with me and to help me get through Christmas. And so I said, okay. She said, I'll buy you a ticket to go back. Well, when I got home, I found out that, like in Germany, it was 4 marks to $1. I mean,
mm,
I could make a lot of dollars in the next 6 months and then let her buy me a ticket to go back.
sure.
So I took this job in Washington, a contact lens job. And so that's why I happened to be there. And it
So
was really funny because I was smuggling while I was in Europe.
you were smuggling?
This is smuggling. It is the Cold War, and I'm smuggling switchblades to some of the Eastern European countries that wanted. They have army. They have those big hunting knives on the reserve to cut a line or whatever,
Sure.
and they wanted switchblades. Well, I was in Germany. Switchblades, the Zollingen steel is the best. So I went and bought a whole bunch of switchblades, and I packed them in my parachute.
Uh,
You
holy,
know,
holy shit, Kim.
it worked.
You've not led a boring life throughout the story at
No.
this point. So you all this jumping, all this craziness, the 60s is going on, you're skydiving, you're doing all this different stuff, but you say you take a really long hiatus from skydiving. I assume that did life just get in the way, or did you make a conscious decision to take a break?
Well, it was unwanted, unprepared break because what happened, now you have to remember I started jumping when I was 20
Mm,
and now I'm married all of a sudden, and we were both 28 when I was married, I think.
mm,
Or no, I was turning 28, he was already 28. So anyway, that a lot happened in that 7 years or so for me anyway. And then when we got married, everything was fine. And of course, immediately I was pregnant. And so I wasn't jumping from that time until I was in the hospital, had the baby.
mm.
And he was supposed to go out and do a test jump because he was a test jumper for Pioneer
Okay.
when when we got married. He was working already, they said, in Pioneer. And so he was doing test jumping. And I said, well, not today. I'm in labor. I said, just call Mr. Abramson and tell him that, you have to take me to the hospital and the baby's on the way. And I've already been in labor for 12 or 14 hours. So it's imminent.
Right.
And so he said, oh, no, I can't do that. They've got all these people planned. I said, how many people? He said, well, four of us. And I said, call him. And so he called, and the guy said, go to the hospital. We'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
So anyway, tomorrow it rained. And so and I had the baby and everything, our first daughter. And the next day it rained. And the following day, my mother was coming in to Hartford in the plane to help with everything. And so Milan he did the test jump that day. And he decided he could make sure he got it done and got to the airport and everything if he landed this wing. It was a Regala wing. If he landed it in the bowl at Orange instead of in the trees, he did 10 or 11 jumps in the trees. He had to land it because it was so unstable.
Uh,
This time it seemed a little better, so he was going to try to land it in the bowl, which he probably would have done, in March or April or May. But in August, the heat was just incredible. And
sure.
it was the thermals coming up off the runway as he crossed the runway. And it started oscillating forward and back because it was a wing. And it was going forward and back, forward and back. And he couldn't stop it. And so, fortunately, the wind was still taking him across the runway towards the wall. And in the landing, he fell 90 feet through the canopy
Wow.
underneath his feet. And
Wow.
they said they didn't think he was going to make it. So 3 years and 11 surgeries later, he said, we're not jumping anymore. We've got two little girls now. And, he said, I don't want to take the risk. They saved my legs. They were going to amputate at one point.
Sure.
So he said, don't, you know, and he said, we'll just stay away from airports. Well, we did until the kids were in their teens, and then we bought an airplane. Everybody had to learn to fly again. Yeah.
So now growing up, your kids, did they know all these stories? Did they know that mom and dad were kind of badasses?
I think so, because we had a lot of badasses coming to our house from foreign countries. They'd always say, who's sleeping in my bed tonight?
Did they, I mean, did they know the stories of, I mean, you smuggled switchblades in Europe.
Well, they didn't know that.
That's, do they know it? Do they know it
My
now? Or
mama would never, yeah, they'd say my mom would never do that.
so are they going to learn that on the podcast? Please tell me yes.
No, they might. I don't know. I don't think they know much about that experience.
Oh,
You
that's absolutely spectacular. So, I mean, you obviously life gets in the way, and your husband gets injured, which will slow anybody down, but especially that kind of injury. You're talking about some severe stuff, but you guys
yeah,
get you get yourself back in the air, so at least you're enjoying aviation at the
yeah,
time.
we were into play. Scuba diving was our big thing, and aviation. Those two things. We felt comfortable in both atmospheres. So,
Sure. Now, what was
that
the
was
what was the big spark to get back in the air? Like, did the fire ever go out, or did it spark back up?
no, the fire never went out. And I always thought, well, I really could go and keep jumping and just, on the weekends down there and go out to the drop zone and everything. And when my oldest daughter turned 18, my husband took her down. I didn't even go that day. Took her down to make her first jump in Florida. And the the other daughter, when she graduated high school and she was 17, and she went right into um, what's it called? FIT, Florida Institute of Technology,
Okay.
as to fly, and so she got her she was going to be a commercial pilot was what the intention was. So because the other day she asked me, how come I didn't make my first jump when I was 18? How come Holly did and I didn't? And I said, well, you weren't home, you were flying airplanes, you were at school already. Because she went, the minute she graduated, she went up there and spent the summer and got her licenses, and school started in the fall. So yeah, they knew all about what we were doing, and they just figured this is the way everybody lives. They, you know, because my husband wouldn't let anybody speak Serbo-Croatian in our household, and he wouldn't teach the kids Serbo-Croatian. So basically, they didn't know any foreign languages.
Mm.
And so, I mean, I did and he did, but they were just English. So when people came, we could translate for them. One time we went, one time we went to Jamaica for a wedding, and his mother flew over from England without telling us. And we were at the airport to get on the plane to Jamaica. And he said, again, mental telepathy. He said, I don't know. I said, I just have a feeling that mom might show up. And I said, why do you think? She didn't say anything. She would, she's living in England. So he went over and got on British Airways and asked if there was anybody coming in with the name of Knor, Knor. And they said, well, they can't tell you. And she said, I'm her son, and this is please, you got to
Right.
tell me, because I'm leaving the country right now. And so they told him, yeah, they said her plane landed about half an hour ago. So we found her just getting into a taxi. And we
So
still
this,
made our flight.
there's telepathy going through the whole family.
I know it's kind of weird, but meanwhile, some Yugoslav people came from Germany. He was living in Germany, and they came to our house to visit. So we left the kids with that couple so that we could go to Jamaica. We had planned to send them to friend's house, but they showed up. So said, oh, well, the kids can stay home.
Well, there you
And
go.
but they didn't speak English. So now grandma shows up and she speaks Croatian and English. So she, I said, I don't know how these things work out, but there's a plan up above that I don't understand. It
It
just,
was perfect. So
yeah.
your first jump back, you've decided, obviously the fire never went out. Now you're deciding you're going to go jump again. What was the first jump back?
Well, well, the reason I got back into it was because my husband died.
Mm.
30 years, we were married 30 years, and boom, that book was closed, and he had an aneurysm, left side of his brain, he's gone. And so I cleared out of Florida, and, we all came to Colorado together.
Mm.
And I went to a reunion, a pioneers reunion. Okay. And there was Jerry Borkman, who was he was a Golden Knight. He was on the US team with me in 62. And
Wow.
he said, why don't you come to just make one jump for your kids' sake? And I said, no, I said, I don't think and I said, I'll ask them, but I don't think so. And he said, yeah. And he said, haven't you wanted to? I said, of course. I figured as soon as I could. He said, well, come on. He said, and I said, I don't know anything about these new shoots, the squares, or everything's different. And
Sure.
I said, I don't know. So anyway, he talked me into coming out and making that one jump. It's like saying just eat one peanut, you know, no more, just one. That's all you get.
Yeah.
So here I am still at it.
So
But I've had interruptions, even though I started back in 2003. Now we're 20 years later again.
sure.
And I have not been able to get my 1,000 jumps because of all these interruptions, like raising the grandchildren. I was a daycare center for the grandchildren because both my daughters worked in medicine.
Oh,
Well, one of them is a veterinarian that she's just going into her 29th year of veterinary. If you ever saw that, let's see, which TV show was it that um, she was on for 8 years?
oh wow.
Yeah, Animal Planet, and it was
Okay.
Emergency Vets was the name of
Okay,
the
cool.
program, and she was on that all the time, and then I got to tour with her as a babysitter, and we had to go do her signings and stuff like that in the
Oh
summer.
wow.
It was fun.
So, I mean, the reasons that you've taken breaks have been pretty interesting reasons, no doubt.
Yeah, they weren't just because
Sure.
I didn't get tired of skydiving. I was still not tired of skydiving.
Sure. Well, we had
I don't
talked to pre-podcast. You had said that you've got a specific goal in mind to celebrate your 1,000th if you can crank through and get the jumps. Please tell me about that.
Well, right now we've been at first I was complaining, what am I going to do for that thousandth jump and where am I going to go and where am I going to do it and so on and so on. And so the United States Parachute Association has been sponsoring and pushing and helping me, not pushing, but I would say supporting me.
Sure.
And Sherry Butcher is a mover and a shaker, and she has really put this all into gear because I figured it was I mean I couldn't afford to do tandems, 400 tandems or whatever. And
Sure.
so she started this program, Rush for the Gold, and it's just been amazing, and I'm so excited because now Melissa is on board too, and so now I have USPA and the museum both on board trying to support me with this, and so I just figured that maybe since Sherry started the whole thing out for me, my thousands jump should be at her drop zone in a big celebration because she's the one that put it all together and got it going. And she has a beautiful drop zone in Ohio. It's Air Ohio. So it's really a great place. And then we go immediately from there to Egypt to jump in the pyramids. That's going to be my present to myself, my reward.
Absolutely. I mean, how spectacular. I've seen now for obviously a number of years, and I know many of the people that have gone and made the jump and some of the teams that have gone over there and stuff, and every one of them is just jaw on the floor. And as I said before the podcast, I've been lucky enough to fly over the pyramids and to see the pyramids, but I've never jumped over the pyramids. So you're certainly going to have one over me.
I haven't even seen them. I'm so excited. And I've talked to three people who actually have jumped there. And one of them is a TI, a tandem instructor. And they said, yeah, you can do tandems. And he said, tell me when you want to go. And so that's, oh my gosh, I can hardly wait.
I bet. Well, I mean, it sounds to me like with everything that you've said and the stories that you've told me, that a lot obviously has changed in the sport in regards to technology and the equipment and stuff. But it sounds like even though it's dramatically bigger, the community is still pretty similar.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The community, I mean, like you say, there's everybody from people living in the streets to multimillionaires that are in skydiving, and that doesn't matter what you did, where you are, whatever, everybody has the same DNA. They
Sure.
want to be up in the air flying like a bird, whether it's an airplane or a parachute or whatever. But I think parachutists have gone one step farther. I don't want that machine around me. I just want to fly like a bird by myself.
Yep. Yep. Well, there
And
used to be a
that's what's happening.
there used to be a great T-shirt that said if you want to get it, if you want to learn how to fly, you need to get out of the plane, which is
I would
great.
like one of those. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It's a
That's a
great
cool
saying.
one. Yeah,
I
that is.
honestly, my favorite story though is the fact that you were basically rehooked up with your soon to be defecting Yugoslavian husband by a CIA agent. You-
Everything in my life is like that. It's just crazy. Like, how did that happen? Or, how did these doors just keep opening? So, everybody says, well, I don't know. I
when's
don't know. And
when
I
is
said, no,
the
just take the jump.
when is the book coming out? That's what I want to know. You know you have to
Well,
write a book.
I sold my house, and 3 years ago now, 3 years ago, this past July, and I was gonna just sell my house. I don't need this big house. The kids are all gone, so, and then I bought a little motorhome, 21
Nice.
foot motorhome that just fits in the the Safeway or the Walmart parking lot. Those lines that are there to park in,
Sure.
that's 20 feet. So it's a really handy dandy, and I can live in it. I've got a king size bed and a full refrigerator and everything in that little tiny thing. And I was going to keep it for 1 year and go collect stuff for my book, some of the old things back from the 60s that I just needed, because it's going to be a nonfiction, a creative nonfiction.
Sure.
So that is important. So anyway, while I was doing that, I had so much fun meeting up with all these people, and making a tandem here and there. And I thought, I think I'll do this a little bit longer.
Sure.
And then I got thinking, I don't know, again, something happened in my head that said, well, you can make that 1,000 jump.
Damn right you
You
can.
you can. You have a home that you're traveling in. You could make that. So I was at one of the museum events, and I was talking to, several of the board of directors and stuff like that about, here's what I really love to do someday, but I think it can't happen. And then Sherry Butcher, they said, go talk to Sherry Butcher. She makes everything happen, and she's sitting right over there. And I said, yeah. So I went over and talked to her, and everybody was drinking. So I thought, she won't remember this. A year later, she said, are you ready to make these jumps? I'm on board now. And so,
It's fantastic. Well, I mean, if you think about it, even in my time in skydiving, and I've been jumping for coming up on 29 years now. During my time, we went from still being considered an extremely dangerous, extreme sport
yeah,
to being almost ridiculously mainstream. And it's everywhere you see, there's an advertisement that has skydiving and base jumping and all this stuff
right.
that has become so mainstream. And so having someone like you that's going out and hitting that golden wings and 1,000 jump mark is a huge boon for the sport. I mean, I actually just saw a post today from a member of a Facebook page called the Beginner Skydiving Forum, which I reference all the time. And it was a
Hmm.
gentleman talking about how amazing his first tandem was, and that he's booked his AFF and it starts in a couple of days, and that his only regret was he didn't find skydiving until 65. And every response that I saw was, welcome to the club. It's never too late. Get going. You've got 30 years worth of jumping left in you. Thinking of someone like Lou Sanborn and all these amazing
Sure.
guys that are jumping, well into what would be considered the golden years. And they're like, hell no, golden years. I'm going to go make some skydives.
Well, this is what I found in traveling across the country and going to all the drop zones and everything. And these people have white hair, gray hair, whatever. And these have been a lot of people that I knew from back in my day.
Yep.
And they've done just like what I did, is they're back into it again.
Sure.
They took a break and did their whatever they had to do for their work and for their family and so forth. And now they're back into it. Not only that, but like you say, people starting in their 60s that are doing it. And so I said, that's why we started out with pops, the parachutists over 40.
Yep.
And then nothing happened in the 50s, because we figured that was it,
Yeah.
starting at 40, that's really it. And so 50 is nothing. And then all these people coming back in this, so they had to have SOS for the 60s and everything. And I'm a JOE. That's jumpers over 80, because I'm 84 now, for heaven's sakes.
So
And
spectacular.
there's a lot of JOEs. They just did a world record at the last in DeLand last year when we had the museum event there. And I think there were 14 of them, and they actually ended up making the world record with 12 JOEs,
That's
jumpers
incredible,
over
though.
80. And
I
now we
mean,
have jumpers over 90. That's the Johns.
it's honestly, I mean, I know I've said it a ton of times on the podcast that skydiving is one of the few sports that you can continue to do dramatically later in life than a lot of other sports. And modern equipment has done a lot to make that possible. Obviously, it's a lot kinder to jumpers now than it used to be. But jumping actively and setting world records in your 80s, jumping out of airplanes, this is stuff that were just daydreams and
daydreams.
and
Yeah,
now it's being done, and
it's it's being
the
done. Yeah,
the fact that it's not front page headlines astounds me because it should be.
yeah. Well, I've been asked to do some like this, a podcast, or to do an article, or the People magazine. They're saving some of the stuff they've been interviewing me. They have one issue out already, and the last one they said they're going to have a program about um, what do you do when you retire or something like that. And so that's going to be, presented at that time.
Sure.
But one thing that I always think of, and this is just a little vision I have in my mind, that when you're ready to go to the grave, my youngest grandson says, "Well, you're going to be 102." He's been saying that since he was 6 years old. 102. So he said, well, for your 100th birthday, they've all jumped with me, my grandchildren, my children, and yeah, they, he said, when you're 102, he said, for your 100th birthday, we're all going to get on the same load together and jump. They have to have a big plane because we're all going to do tandems together, unless some of us are, photographers or whatever.
Sure.
So anyway, I said, well, wouldn't the greatest thing be, and this is sort of like one of those dreams when you're half awake and half, and I said, there's this thing about coming into your grave, skidding into your grave, whatever. I
Yeah.
can't remember what that saying is about, and they show a picture of a guy's just throwing dirt up as he skids into his grave, they got it all dug and ready for him. And I said, if you come in on a parachute, I wonder if they would put the parachute in with you.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean that's like what the one rock and roll song of the guy that gets buried in his Cadillac. Why couldn't you be buried with your equipment?
Yeah, exactly. Well, my husband was buried with his dog.
Well, there you go. What?
Yeah, because the dog, when they disconnected him and everything, and he was legally pronounced dead. I had just gone home because I had been up like 50 hours. And my daughter said, just go home and lay down until it's all over. And I said, okay. And this dog started howling, just howling and crying and howling. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. I went out there and he wouldn't get up on his feet or anything. He wouldn't move. He would not get up. And
Wow.
so I called my daughter at the hospital and she said, yeah, they just pronounced him dead. And I said, this dog listened to him. And she said, oh my gosh. And so she came home and she tried to get him up and she couldn't. So we had to lift him up, take him down to the vet and euthanize him
Wow.
because he was old anyway. He was just living for my husband. And
Wow.
he
Well,
should have been.
there's something kind of poetic about that, yeah.
Yeah, it's just amazing, I mean, how these things happen. But
I'll tell you what, I can't wait for your book to come out because I guarantee there's so many stories that I could do 10 podcasts with you and still not get a tenth of them. I have no doubt.
well, I'm trying to write them on cards so that I remember, when I'm telling somebody else, oh yeah, I remember that, and write it down because I figured when I get old, then I can, write it,
Kim,
maybe when I'm 90.
you're not there yet.
No,
You're not
I've
there
got to
yet.
get my 1,000 and go to the pyramids and do a couple other
Yeah. So
things.
tell me, so everybody can follow along because I'm really going to be looking forward to watching as you continue on your journey to get the golden wings, and especially I can't wait to see you in free fall over the pyramids. So how do people follow you? How do they find out what you're doing? How do they come out and say hello to you if you're at the drop zone? What's your
Well,
Facebook?
my Facebook is I think it's Kim Emmons Knor is my Facebook. They can get me through that.
Okay.
And also, every time we do something or every time I get a news thing and so forth, I have a Facebook, Pioneers of Sport Parachuting,
Okay.
and they can go there. And we usually post at least the videos and stuff on what it was, not
Okay.
necessarily the articles. But the place that's really following, as far as, I mean, I have a whole PR thing that USPA, USPA got involved, and
Awesome.
they have this, and it's amazing. they want to know exactly where I'm going to jump, at least a week in advance and so forth. And they have the local press come out, and
Awesome.
we had CBS Colorado came out, and they're going to be following along. And it actually went national. So if you look at CBS, and it's really funny. I said, well, just look under CBS Colorado, and there's the story about the 84-year-old woman, blah blah blah, and it pops up.
That's spectacular.
You don't have to search very far; it just pops up. So,
So if people can find you either by your personal page, Facebook, they can find you through the USPA who's tracking everything that you're doing, or they can literally just go onto CBS.com and go 84-year-old skydiver looking for 1,000 jumps.
I think
That's
so.
awesome.
Yeah, that's really funny. So,
No,
I
that's
don't
great.
know. There might be more things that come out, because that was all I started in June in the Midwest, and now I'm doing Colorado and Utah and Arizona, and then California, and then
Awesome.
I have to come back and ski for a month in January, and then I go to Florida.
You really are a badass.
So, yeah, that's what my daughter says. She said, "Oh, there's my badass mom doing it again."
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. And the best part about a badass is they don't know it because that's just what they do.
Yeah.
Kim, I'll
It's
tell
just,
you what, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to sit down. I wish we could get a ton more stories, but let's plan on a round two. Let's do this again down the road a little ways as you're getting closer to your mark, or maybe after you've hit that mark, because I'd love to hear all the stories.
oh yeah, yeah. That'll be great. I'd love to do this at sort of like the end of next summer,
Perfect. Count me
because
in.
I still won't be there yet, but I will have done East Coast and West Coast. And oh my gosh, I have people sending me stuff all the time. There's a gal named Jen Jones. I don't know if you know her
I don't.
or know about her, but we got a whole thing that's coming up. Oh my gosh, we're going to do this on, let's see, we're going to do it on June 15th
Okay.
at Niagara Falls.
Awesome.
Yeah, and she's the TI, but this is going to be her last TI jump, because that's her 62nd birthday. And then she says, I'm not doing TI anymore. Is that exciting or what?
That's incredible. That's fantastic. That one I'm definitely we're gonna have to do this again. So
Yeah,
end of next summer, we're absolutely sitting down for another one of
yeah,
these.
we'll keep in touch.
Perfect. Kim, again, I can't thank you so much. Have an amazing day, and I'm gonna keep up
Thank
on your
you.
journey.
You too. Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much. I love it. I love it. Bye bye.